Okay, awesome. Hope this thing is working. Hope everything is gonna work out okay with this. This is my first time ever trying to do something like this. I don't really know how this program works. I don't know how this mic works. I don't know how the webcam works. So let's pray for the best. And let's pray that everything goes smoothly and that this doesn't take up a lot of my time because that would suck. That would really suck. All right. We left off on quarterbacks. I got to Will Levis, which was my number 20, and right at that point, my headphones had turned off, run out of battery, died. So, I got through everything. I did want to make some mentions here and there. I think Tua on this list could definitely be someone that drops further than we think. And now my cat's going to go across the screen. Awesome, Domino. Do that. Do you. Whatever you'd like, bud. I think Will Levis is someone that can go a lot higher than what I have here. I don't know what to make out of the Titans offense. They drafted with their first round pick the best offensive tackle in college football last year. So he's got more protection. That's one thing. The other is they also have a pass catching running back for him in Tony Pollard that can help out with screen passes and things like that to get him some extra yards, some extra points, some first downs to keep the offense going, some easier passes for him to do his thing. You're really going to do this right now. And in addition to that, they got Calvin Ridley. Now, Calvin Ridley wasn't exactly very good last year. I know a lot of people can probably point to Trevor Lawrence and say that it was Trevor Lawrence's fault that Calvin Ridley didn't look good. Trevor Lawrence is a bum, yada, yada. If you actually watch the games, it was very much Calvin Ridley who was the problem. So hard to say. There's a lot of variables with the Titans offense, but I do think because of that, Will Levis can possibly be finishing much higher than quarterback 20. But from my point of view, with my opinion, I think that this is probably the landing spot for Will Levis. I don't see the Titans offense being awesome. I see them being good. So I guess we'll just have to see. Oops. All right, and then we can probably move on to running backs. There are some honorable mentions at quarterback that could surprise us and end in the top 20. Obviously, Drake May, the third overall pick, New England Patriots quarterback, is one of those guys. They don't have a very good O-line. They just are not very well run. So I don't think he's finishing in the top 20, but obviously with rookies, you never know, especially ones that are as highly touted as Drake May was. I don't think he's really as good as people have made him out to be. I saw his games. He didn't impress me in them, but could be, right? It's always unknown with those rookie quarterbacks. To that same end, Bo Nix is another one. Now, Bo Nix, I do think is a good player. I really liked him in college. I think he has the worst landing spot, but I mean, who knows? Sean Payton could make a great quarterback out of Bo Nix. He's got Cortland Sutton, who's a very solid wide receiver. They've got last year rookie Marvin Mims, who for some reason they don't like playing, but I can see him exploding this season and making a wide receiver one target for himself for Bo Nix. So that offense could explode this year without anyone having expected it. And then Baker Mayfield is another one. He was really good last year. Nobody really believes in Baker Mayfield. I think he's a good quarterback. I just don't love his team. So I also don't think he's like a great quarterback for fantasy purposes. Like, he does the job, he's not stalwart offensive quarterback. He's got no running yards coming. And I don't like Mike Evans or Chris Godwin as wide receivers. Obviously, I don't really have a good reason to say that because Mike Evans has balled year in and year out. And I don't know what my problem is, but alas. So those are three honorable mentions I'll make. Now, moving on to running backs, obviously, to no surprise, my running back one is the best offensive weapon in football, Christian McCaffrey. He's just got so many ways to get you fantasy points, so many ways to get you touchdowns. I mean, they can pass it to him for a touchdown. He can run for a touchdown. He can throw for a touchdown. You name it. He's going to get touchdowns. And that is how Christian McCaffrey is going to end number one once again. Now, number two, I have Bijan Robinson. Obviously, last year, he didn't have too great a finish. By average, he was RB20, only getting you about 12 fantasy points per game. But that being said, Bijan Robinson did finish RB12 overall, meaning he stayed pretty healthy. And then on top of that, for him to do as well as he did, despite having a coach that was almost actively working against him, not using him, giving just as much touches to bum-ass Tyler Algier, it's hard to believe that in an offense that seems to, and when I say this as a Rams fan who knows the people that are running this new Falcons team. They are coaching staff that like to give the ball to the best players. So I think this year Bijan Robinson is going to be fed to the same level as Kyren Williams from last year, except Bijan Robinson is more Christian McCaffrey than he is Kyren Williams. He works so well for a Rams-type offensive scheme. I mean, he's the perfect running back for a West Coast offense, like the Niners, like the Rams. So if they are going to run the Rams style of game, I mean, Bijan is going to be unreal this year. He's going to be just like CMC, getting you as many touchdowns as you can handle. He's going to make you obese with touchdowns. You know what I mean? So my easy RB2. Right after that, I have the most explosive, dangerous running back in football at number 3. Again, we are assuming perfect health for this season. If everybody is healthy, there are not more than 2 people I can name that will score higher than Devon Achane. I mean, he has probably in the top 20 the least amount of touches last year. Now keep that in mind. In this top 20, out of all the people that are here, he probably had the least amount of touches. He finished RB22 overall, right? So just outside an RB2 spot. And he finished RB4 in averages. I mean, you give Devon Achane 5 touches in one game, he can get you 20 points with just 5. I don't remember what the finishing stat was and how much the games that he was injured or got injured had affected his averages. But before that first big injury, he was averaging 10 yards per carry. That means every time you gave him the ball on 1st and 10, he got you a new set of downs. That is how explosive and how good this guy is. I mean, if the ball goes in his hands and you're against him in fantasy, you should be panicking. So, again, another one that for me I think is kind of an easy pick, RB3 finish, Devon Achane. Now, I don't think he's going to finish here. He's had so many health issues in his young career. So in a real world, so far we've been doing perfect well. In a real world, I'm not even sure Devon Achane is an RB10 finish. His health is going to be a huge question mark this year. Number 4, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, the Lions running back. Last year, despite being a clear number 2 for most of the season in his committee, he finished RB9 overall and RB7 on averages. So he's another one that got a lot less touches than other people on this list, especially I'm about to hit some people that are all volume, but his volume was low. He still finished RB9, so he was still an RB1 player for you. His average was RB7, so he's one of the best fantasy running backs available. He's going to have more touches this year. He's the clear lead back in this Lions running back committee now. How can you not be high on him? I mean, yeah, he's maybe one tier below Bijan and CMC in terms of complete offensive weapons. He's also a pass-catching running back that is a bull cow running back and can explode for, maybe not bull cow, like he's not that resilient, but he can explode for yardage anytime you give him the ball. To a stronger extent than Bijan, honestly. He's probably a better pure running back than Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson is a more powerful back, and that's why he can do volume running and has no need for a committee, and why he's a better fantasy option. But in just their running ability, Jahmyr Gibbs might be better. Pass catching, they're about the same. So, I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is as good a pick as any. He's my RB4 finish for the year. It would just be a slight improvement over what he did last year, but he's going to have much more volume this year. So, sky's the limit. Number 5, I have Breece Hall. I think it's pretty obvious by now how much of a Breece Hall, I don't want to say hater, because I do think he's a good running back, but I'm not a believer the way, or maybe it's not even that I'm not a believer. I just don't understand where the Breece Hall hype is coming from. He finished RB6 total last year. On averages, he was RB9. So, on average points, wiping away some injuries that came to other players, he was the 9th RB in the league in terms of fantasy points. So I don't get where the hype is coming from. I don't think you could have had a better situation than Breece Hall did last year. The volume that Breece Hall was getting, I mean, the only people that could touch it were like Kyron Williams and Rachaad White. And that volume came from how bad the offense was. Now, this year, if you're assuming health, right, I'm assuming health for Breece Hall, and I'm assuming health for Aaron Rodgers, which means the Jets are going to pass the ball more than they're going to run the ball, right? Last year, they only ran the ball because they could not pass the ball. Their O-line is still trash, absolute garbage. If Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy, which in this list I'm assuming he does, I think I'm even being generous putting Breece Hall at 5. Yeah, he was not good last year. People are confused. I don't know if they just did not watch games last year because the Jets were unwatchable, but he was not good. Is that the O-line's fault? Probably. Yeah, probably. But for, I don't know, maybe like the first 14 weeks of the season, Breece Hall was, maybe even 15, Breece Hall was averaging like 2 yards per carry. You gave him the ball, and you're giving him the ball 50 times. One out of those 50 runs was a cookie monster run that went all the way from the 50-yard line to the touchdown and got you points and saved you that week. Every other of the 49 plays was a 2 or 1 yard run. That's how bad he was. Now, the O-line is not better, so his running is not going to be better. If he has less volume in a game, then the chance that he's going to break away and hit one of those big runs that gets you all your points from Breece Hall that week is very low. And on top of that, last year he was used a lot in the passing game because when they did pass, they could only pass short. So a lot of what made him such a good fantasy player last year is gone. And people are projecting him to do much better this year. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He's not better as a running back than any of the 4 people listed in front of him. Hell, he might be the worst running back on this top 10 list. Maybe better than Pacheco and Kyron, but then Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry aren't on the top 10. Saquon isn't on the top 10. So he's not a top 10 running back by skill. I don't like Breece Hall. I'm not high on him the way other people are. So for me, he's at best an RB5 finish, assuming health. I mean, assuming health, I could really knock him out of the top 10. But I had him at RB5 just because he does have that explosive capability. And it's hard to reconcile the fact that the Jets are going to be healthy this year. Like, it's very hard for me to, even under the assumption that they are, not put that against the Jets, thereby bringing Breece Hall up a little bit. I don't know. Tough to kind of explain this one, but I have Breece Hall at 5. Number 6, I have James Cook. From week 11 of last year, when the Bills got rid of their horrible offensive coordinator and replaced them with what's his name, who I can't remember right now, James Cook went on a fucking tear. RB4 average to finish the season from weeks 11 to week 17. He was the RB10 total last year, so his floor is a top 10 finish. He is an RB1. And then He was RB17 on averages. Again, obviously he was very hurt in terms of his average points per game by the first half of the season and that first offensive coordinator that the Bills fired. But, I mean, he is so good. He is one of those Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb type, pure, traditional, chin down, shoulder up running backs that is just going to explode through the defense and get you yards. He's got great acceleration, and he's not afraid of contact. He is a little bit on the smaller side. He's not like Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, who are like powerhouses. So his risk of injury is probably a lot higher than other players. But that being said, we're assuming health. In health, honestly, James Cook is one of the best running backs in football right now, in my opinion. Not better than the first four, but maybe better as a traditional, pure running back than Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. So, you know, I love him this year, and 6 is, I think, his floor. Number 7, Jonathan Taylor. Kind of a hard one for me. I had Jonathan Taylor last year in fantasy. He's still a really good player. I mean, he's the prototype Bijan, right? He was what Bijan was supposed... He was Bijan before Bijan, basically. But he's just not as good, really. I mean, the first year that I played fantasy, or maybe I guess the second year that I played fantasy, Jay Taylor, and the first year I wasn't really paying attention to it, so it's not really saying much. Really, my second year playing fantasy was my first year, so we'll just go with that. My first year playing fantasy, Jay Taylor was the consensus number 1 pick. He was the CMC of that year, 2 years ago. And then he got injured. He barely played. He came back last year, looked good, but didn't look like the guy that people were hyping up to be the best running back for fantasy the year prior. So I don't know where that comes from exactly. I think being on a team where Anthony Richardson is your quarterback is really going to hurt you. There are going to be a lot of places where you would expect a run to happen where the Colts would be comfortable just going to a passing play because they know that if push comes to shove, Richardson can just run it down, right? It's going to eat into his touchdown. It's going to eat into his volume. I don't love Jonathan Taylor as much this year as I did getting him as like a sneaky late pick on PUP last year. Even though it was the same situation, but the reason I don't like him as much, actually, you know what? Scratch that. I don't know what I'm saying. It's the same situation as last year. I didn't like him as much last year either. It was the fact that he was on PUP and he was going later anyway because of the Anthony Richardson situation is why I liked him so much last year. The reason I don't like him as much this year is because he was drafted as an RB1, right? Which I think he still is, and I think he will finish there. The reason I can't put him in front of any of these 6 people, whereas most people would put him in front of some of these guys at least, is that I think people are forgetting that we had the same argument last year that Anthony Richardson is going to hurt Jonathan Taylor. Now, the good news is Anthony Richardson is not going to play this full season. He's going to get injured pretty soon, and Jonathan Taylor will be fine after that. But I'm assuming health, so yeah, I think Jonathan Taylor in actuality will be probably a top 5 finish, but as far as this list goes, 7 sounds about right, which means I think he'll be 7 on averages. And he was 14 last year, so, you know, that's a huge step up, but they also don't have a committee anymore. They were running a committee last year. So Jonathan Taylor is the clear lead back and should have a really good season. Number 8, I have Travis Etienne Jr. He was one of the best running backs in fantasy last year, bar none. I mean, bar 2, but he was RB3 in the total finish for last year. On averages, he was RB5. The guy was amazing. He was so good. He got so much volume. He was the Jacksonville offense. Now, the reason he's 8 on my list and why I think most people would have him somewhere around here is that, at least most people in the know, is that Jacksonville has literally stated that they don't want to give Travis Etienne the same level of workload he had last year. And the reason for that is not that he's not capable of it or that he's not good. It's that they do have another highly drafted running back from last year, Tank Bigsby, that they can use to avoid having their best offensive weapon get injured, right? So they're going to use him less, and that's going to hurt him in terms of his numbers this season. But I mean, he's still he's one of those guys that no matter what situation he's in, he's going to do well because he's that good. For fantasy, I actually don't think he's that good in real life, but for fantasy, he is that good. Yeah, so my number 8. Number 9, I think, could actually beat out ETN and Taylor if everyone stays healthy and everything, is Isaiah Pacheco. He finished RB13 last year, RB12 on averages, and that was in a 3 running back committee on the Chiefs. He is the lead back on the Chiefs right now. This is obviously being recorded after the first game of the NFL season, so I already see what he did yesterday, and I think he got something like 15 points. Obviously, that's over his average from last year, and just doing a quick look on this list would have put him at RB5 average if he got that every game, or at least average that throughout the season. Pacheco looks good this year. I'm really high on him. Yeah. Anyway, number 10, I have Kyren Williams. I'm obviously a lot lower on Kyren than most people are because I am a Rams fan. And I know that the reason that Kyren was so good last year, RB4 total finish, RB2 in average, the reason he was so good last year is not because of how good he is as a running back. Now, he's a good running back, don't get me wrong, but that is not why he was such a good fantasy running back. The reason he was such a good fantasy running back is because the Rams have the best fantasy scheming of any team in the NFL. They feed their stars. Kyren Williams was their RB1. He got all the fucking volume in the world. And they didn't have another running back that they could do that with, right? Or they didn't have another running back to do a committee with. The Rams, in general, tend to like having just one stud running back, but always giving him a backup for certain moments, right? In the big moments, they'll play their star. But throughout the course of a game, they don't want to put too much wear and tear on their stars, so they will have a secondary running back. Now, it's not going to be a committee usually, right? Why is it different this year, and why, as a Rams fan, am I lower on Kyren than anybody else? They drafted Blake Corum. That, in and of itself, tells me that Kyren Williams will not have the same season as last season. Why? Because Blake Corum was one of the best running backs in college. I mean, he was my best running back in college. From what I saw, he was the guy, right? Rams got him in the 3rd round. He was the 3rd running back taken off the draft, maybe 4th. But he was the 3rd or 4th running back taken from the draft. He's a blue chip prospect, meaning from high school he was highly touted. Kyren was a 5th round pick. Now, you might not think that matters because of how Kyren played last year, but draft capital always matters in this league. Especially when you have a 5th round pick that played well enough to be one of the best RBs in the league last year, and then you still get a 3rd round running back who's the 3rd or 4th running back off the board. The Rams want to play Blake Corum. I don't blame them. Blake Corum's awesome. He is a better running back than Kyren Williams. Kyren will be the clear lead in the committee, but he's not going to have the volume he had last year. And for that reason, he can't be a top 5 running back. And I honestly hesitated giving him RB10, but the Rams get touchdowns through running backs. They always run it in the end zone. So I'm going to give Kyren that. He will be getting touchdowns, so I will put him as RB1, or at least in the RB1 tier as RB10. Now, this is the guy I really wanted to put here in that position, Saquon Barkley at number 11. The reason I didn't is the biggest difference between Saquon and Kyren is the touchdowns they're going to get. Saquon is not going to get a lot of touchdowns. I think people are going to be shocked at how Saquon's year goes this year. Everyone is expecting, because he's behind a much better O-line this year in the Philadelphia Eagles, he is going to do a lot better. I don't, because the O-line scores for the Eagles, not the running backs. that one guy, I forget his name right now, that went to the Bears, that was their running back last year. Fuck, I've completely forgotten his name. What was his name? Whatever. But the Eagles running back from last year, who I thought was a solid running back, I expected a big year from him because of the Eagles O-line. And lo and behold, no. Every touchdown was Jalen Hurts. The same thing's going to happen to Saquon. I mean, Saquon's probably going to do more work than whoever the name of the guy was from last year. But despite having more work, he's still not going to get that touchdown total that usually makes stud fantasy players, right? So, RB16 total finish last year, not good. So I'm even assuming he's going to do better. RB11 on averages, so I have him basically in the same spot. Yeah, I honestly, I would have put him 10 if it was different. If it wasn't for Kyren Williams, the amount more touchdowns he's going to have than Saquon. But yeah, number 12, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry finished RB8 in totals last year, but pretty much completely due to being an Iron Man and never getting injured. He was RB16 on averages. Derrick Henry, you knew, is gone. He's not the same guy. He does not have the same explosive ability. He is still good enough to get through, 3 yards, despite whatever the defense throws at him. But in terms of the days of 200-yard Derrick Henry games, that's over. The Ravens aren't even going to run it that much for him to be like that. The Titans' offense was it was based off of Derrick Henry. The Titans created an offense just based off of the fact that they had Derrick Henry. There isn't a better situation than that. Derrick Henry didn't do well last year, despite that being their offensive scheme. Obviously, they did change it a little bit. It wasn't quite the same Titans as before because they knew Derrick Henry was getting older. But I mean, you don't get a better situation. People think he went to the Ravens. Wow, it's such a better situation. You don't get a better situation than the Titans. Obviously, I'm saying that, and I still put him as a higher finish based on his average than last year. I still believe in Derrick Henry. But I also believed in the Ravens O-line, which after what I saw yesterday, I should not have. I didn't realize their O-line was bad. For some reason in my head, they had a good O-line. So that's the only reason I put Derrick Henry up at 12. Otherwise, I don't even know if I would have put him in the first 15. So expect him to drop from this position. Number 13, I have Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, despite starting the season later than everybody else, I mean, he was on PUP. He finished RB11, which is quite amazing, crazy good. He was RB6 in averages, which was mind-blowing to me. Why do I have him at RB13? I have no idea. I literally couldn't tell you. This is just how I feel like he's going to finish. I mean, he's older too. He's shown no signs of stopping, but I don't know. I just don't believe in him, weirdly enough, even though he's my RB2. But I couldn't put him any lower than this either based on what his stats were last year. I mean, quite incredible. RB14, Josh Jacobs. I really wanted to put him lower. I mean, he was the RB23 finish from last year. He was RB19 on averages, so he sucked. Just straight up, he sucked. A lot of people think that's the Raiders' fault. I don't know where that's coming from. The Raiders were a total shit show on offense, but the running back woes were all Josh Jacobs. It was not their O-line or anything. Their O-line wasn't good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't quite their O-line that was the reason Josh Jacobs was doing so poorly. He just sucked. He just very much sucked last year. I don't know how to explain it. People think now that he's on the Packers, he has such a better situation. No, he really doesn't. He doesn't. I mean, he's the clear RB1 on the team, sure. So what? He was the clear RB1 on the Raiders as well. The Packers O-line isn't it's good, but it's not elite. It's not like his situation is so much better. The Packers are going to want to pass the ball. I mean, the running backs they've had in the past have been pass-catching running backs. Is Josh Jacobs going to be okay for pass catching to the level that Aaron Jones was when he was here? I don't know about that. I mean, he can catch the ball, but he's not Aaron Jones. right? He's not Austin Eckler. He's not those kinds of guys. He's a much more traditional running back. I don't love his situation. And honestly, he sucked last year. So the reason I have him at 14 is because I just hated everybody else. I really wanted to put him lower than this, but I just don't like anybody else either. The running back situation is kind of fucked this year, and expect that most of the people that you're going to see popping up in this RB2 tier this year are going to be people you did not expect. Okay, next we have James Conner. Honestly, he probably should be 14. James Conner finished as the RB15 average finish last year. He was injured a lot, as he always is, so this ranking is in health. He's not going to be healthy. He was the RB25 overall finish, which is quite dreadful. That means he was just barely flexible. Yeah, I mean, he's got a good situation, right? He's on the Cardinals, who don't have other RBs that can compete with him. He's the clear RB1. I know certain people like Keon have made out that, oh, they have Trey Benson. It's going to be a committee. Trey Benson's going to take over. No, he's not, dude. No, he's not. James Conner is the clear RB1. The coach has already said so. Trey Benson isn't going to get enough volume to even put up an argument that he should be getting more volume. So, yeah, I think James Conner right here at 15 is apt. I don't think he's going to actually finish in the RB2 tier in real life because of his injury history. But as for the purposes of this, I don't know, mock-up, whatever you want to call it, rankings, I'm going to put him at 15. Next up, I have a tie because I couldn't really decide who should edge out who here. 16A, I have Raheem Mostert, one of the best running backs in fantasy last year. He finished RB2 overall, and on average, he was RB3. Meaning he is as elite as it gets. The Dolphins coaching staff has made it seem like, whereas last year Raheem Mostert was the RB1 in a team that used all their RBs, like actually used all of their RBs, and it wasn't really even just a committee. It was like there was an RB. It was kind of like how wide receivers go, right? There were two wide receivers. One's a wide receiver, one is the main read. The other's a wide receiver two, that when wide receiver one is guarded, he gets the ball. The RBs were kind of like that. They used both of them and just kind of like mixed up who did what. The Dolphins have a very creative offense. So, you know, that being said, at the beginning of the season last season, Raheem Mostert was the RB1. It wasn't quite the same situation, wasn't quite the same scheme. It wasn't until Achane was unlocked that they started running those two RB sets. This year, they're going to start off like that, and Devon Achane is going to be the first target. He's going to be the one they're going to want to draw up plays for. They're going to use Raheem Mostert as the trick, right? Achane is the decoy. Raheem Mostert is going to be able, once Achane gets rolling, to come in, take attention off of, well, he'll be in, but to be used and take attention off of Achane when they're least expecting it, have Raheem Mostert explode for some yards. He's going to be very playable. I don't think he's going to have the same year as last year because it should be Achane's running back room. Now, that being said, Achane will get injured, so Raheem Mostert could finish higher than this. Rachaad White, 16B. You know, I couldn't put him over Raheem Mostert because he's pretty much the same thing, right? Like, he finished really high in fantasy last year due to just completely volume. And when I say same thing, I mean, like, I don't know what I mean, actually. Yeah, because, like, Raheem Mostert was not a volume running back. He was just a guy who did really well, right? Rachaad White sucks. He's the worst starting running back in the league. But he gets so much unbelievable volume that he was able to finish RB5 total, RB9 on averages. I can't put him too much lower than this. I mean, I know he's going to be used a lot, and as much as he sucks, like, volume matters. Number 18, I have Nick Chubb. Now, he doesn't really have any stats from last year because he only played 2 games and got injured at the very beginning of the second one. Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs. He is tied for the best running back, I would say, of the last decade. Who knows what he's going to look like after injury, but a lot of people have come back from ACL tears and looked great. Yeah, I have him 18 because obviously he's missing at least the first 4 games. On averages, I think he'll finish in at least the top 10, probably the top 5. He is going to be the Browns' only offense. I mean, when you have a quarterback as bad as Deshaun Watson, as completely unplayable as Deshaun Watson, you know, you're going to have no choice but to use what works. And Nick Chubb is the only thing that works about that trash offense. So once he comes back, he's going to eat. He is going to get so many fantasy points. He's realistically an RB1, but he's going to have an RB2 tier season because he's going to miss a few games at the very least. Number 19, I have Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker started last season looking like one of the best running backs in fantasy football. I mean, he was, for like the first 9 weeks, he would have at least one Cookie Monster run per game. He finished RB16 and RB18 on averages. So the second half of the season, he really sucked. And he's really not that good of a running back to begin with. I mean, he's average to maybe below average, probably just average in terms of skill. So, you can't really expect too much of him. He just has that explosive ability to get you like a winning week, but not consistently throughout the season. So, because of that ability, he's very much like Breece Hall. Him and Breece Hall are very similar. It's just Breece Hall's baseline level of skill is a lot higher than Kenneth Walker's. Because Breece Hall is a good running back. Kenneth Walker is an average running back. But they have the same kind of thing where, like, what makes them good for fantasy is that you just need one play from them throughout the course of a game. You need them to get enough touches to have that one chance to explode past the defense. But yeah, consistently Kenneth Walker is going to be much worse. Number 20, I have Tony Pollard. He finished RB18 last year, RB25 on averages. So you might ask, okay, well now he's on Tennessee, so why on God's earth would he finish higher than last year when he was the RB1 on Dallas last year? And the answer to that is, I don't know, actually. I really don't know. I don't know why I think he will finish higher. I know that historically the Titans love running, and the Cowboys don't really. Like they are mainly a passing team, right? They're a passing offense. That being said, that's not the reason Tony Pollard didn't do well last year. He just wasn't that great, much like Josh Jacobs. But I don't know. I believe that he can finish here. I think he will. So RB20 for him. Going into the flex tier, I have Aaron Jones as 21. He is in a situation that I like. He is the only running back on the Vikings. The Vikings don't have a passing game. They have one of the worst quarterbacks who is in the history of the NFL, one of the worst quarterbacks who has ever lived, in Sam Darnold as the primary play caller. If you don't know, and I assume none of you know about Sam Darnold, the guy has in his career, I think 5 touchdowns or so, more than he has thrown interceptions. Like, you can't get worse than that. When Jets fans talk about their quarterback curse, it started with Sam Darnold. He was like a top 3 pick or so for the Jets at quarterback and gave them horrific, worse than Zach Wilson levels of season after worse than Zach. Like, their O-line wasn't as bad as it is now, and Sam Darnold was Zach Wilson, if not worse. Yeah, he's probably the worst quarterback to ever live. As far as like the modern NFL as I know it goes. He's really bad, so they are probably going to have to run a lot. The problem is Aaron Jones is really bad, right? So even if they're going to run a lot, like it's like if I were to tell you that fucking Alexander Mattison is going to be used a lot last year, right? It doesn't matter. He sucked. I mean, that's what I thought, right? I had this exact same situation. I was like, oh, he's the Vikings' only running back. And that was when they had a good passing game too. So I was still high on him then, thinking like, oh, the Vikings are going to use him to run it. The Vikings only passed at first, and then Kirk Cousins got injured. Everyone went down, so they had to run. And Madison couldn't do it. He sucked. I mean, he could barely get any yards, despite the fact that that was their only game. Now, with that being said, Madison the year before was really good as a backup quarterback for Dalvin Cook. I think it was Dalvin Cook. He was incredible as Dalvin's backup. So there was reason to have some hype for him. Aaron Jones was bad. He was horrible last year. I mean, RB37 finish, 10.9 fantasy points per game to put him at RB27 on averages. Like, he's not playable, right? I'm bumping him up here because of his situation and because there used to be an Aaron Jones that was a really good player. I don't think that Aaron Jones exists anymore, but I'm going to give him some benefit of the doubt in that his situation is so good and that he'll probably be a little bit better than last season because he did have that injury. But I'm not high on him. I think he'll probably fail despite, the situation. Number 22, I have Joe Mixon. RB7 finish from last year, averaged 13.6 fantasy points per game, putting him at RB13 and an RB2 tier type player. You could argue that he would finish around the same area, like the RB2 range, because of his numbers from last year. But he's on the Texans, and they don't run the ball. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much all it comes down to. Joe Mixon isn't a good player to begin with. He just got a lot of volume on the Bengals, especially last year because Joe Burrow was not healthy. And their quarterback play was atrocious outside of Joe Burrow, and even injured Joe Burrow was atrocious. But that all being said, he is a bad player. The Texans don't run the ball, so it's a match made in hell. He'd be lucky to finish here even, to be honest. I think I was generous when I made this ranking. But alas, RB22 finish probably for the year. He's a flex tier player, so you can comfortably flex him unless you have a better wide receiver option. Number 23, David Montgomery. He finished RB14 total last year, 14.6 average points per game, putting him in an RB1 tier finish at RB8. He's good. David Montgomery's good. He's behind a top 5 O-line, but he's clearly the RB2 on the team this year in a committee with Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'm lower on him. But he's one of those guys that could definitely have a much higher finish than this. Number 24, I have J.K. Dobbins, who was too injured last year to post his stats. Formerly of the Ravens, J.K. Dobbins was their most skilled running back. He has pass-catching capabilities, which means that he can eat that Austin Eckler role that is now empty on this Chargers team. So, if he can stay healthy through the year, who knows? He could even be a top 10 finish, to be honest. Like, he has that kind of upside for the Chargers, but he's also got Gus Edwards on his team. So for me, that docked him a lot of points, even assuming health. And the truth is he's not going to stay healthy throughout the year. Number 25, Ramondre Stevenson. He was the RB33 finish last year. He was injured a lot. He was RB29 on averages, which makes him non-playable last year. But I will mention, to give some grace to him, even though I do have him at 25, that his averages took a hit because all of his injuries happened mid-game. So he's had a lot. He had like 2 or 3 games last year. And the reason I can't confirm this right now is because the tool that I was using on Fantasy Pros to check the history of weekly finishes, they took off, I guess, because the season started. I'm not sure why they do that, but I can't check this on Fantasy Pros again. I just know there were 2 or 3 separate instances last year where he got injured mid-game, and that really ruined his averages. He is a good player. I mean, he's not a good player, but he's a good fantasy player, so he very well could also finish higher than this. They have good quarterback play this year, and normally that would be not a good thing for running backs, but in the case of Ramondre Stevenson, it is a good thing because he's a pass-catching running back. And he could not do that last year because of how poor the QB play was. I mean, Mac Jones, anyone with the last name Jones in this league is not like your fantasy players are ruined. Do not draft from a team that has a Jones quarterback. 26, Brian Robinson Jr., Gunshot Rob, was a surprise last year, finished RB21 and RB20 on averages. He was very playable. He is not someone that is going to have huge weeks, who's going to win you weeks, nothing like that. But he's very consistent. He is you know what to expect from Brian Robinson. He will get you that. He will never lose you weeks the way some other people might. So I really like him. He's a great flex tier guy, and I think 26 is a very, maybe even like underrating him. But 26 is a good spot, I think, for him. And then I put 3 other guys kind of just like there that like could break into these higher tiers: Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, Jalen Warren. Zach Moss is the number 1 running back on Cincinnati. He is going to be in a committee probably. And who knows, Chase Brown might take over his spot. But he was really good last year for the Colts. Played better than Jonathan Taylor, I would say, for at least a while. Yeah, and then Gus Edwards is a touchdown machine. The Chargers are probably going to use him a lot in goal line situations. That's what he's for. That's his role. That's what that's what the Ravens used him for as well. And as you can tell from his stats, I mean, he was the RB19 finish, RB27 on averages, despite being in a committee. He's a solid pick. Then you have Jalen Warren. He is in a 50-50 running back committee with one of the worst running backs in the league, Najee Harris for the Steelers. He finished in front of Najee Harris last year, despite, them getting the exact same, amount of volume. Najee Harris actually had maybe a little bit more volume, but Jalen Warren still finished in front of him. He's not really a playable character, but the one thing I like about him is that he's the better running back, and maybe the Steelers finally realize that this year and let him do more work. We'll see. All right, wide receivers. And obviously there are a lot of other guys that I could mention for that running back rankings, but the problem is if I were to mention them, I would have to assume injury for other players, so I can't. But there are a few people that are handcuffs this year that I really like and think that the chance of injury for the other people that they're handcuffs for is really high. I have one of them, Jalen Wright, really like him. And there are others that I can't think of right now. Wide receivers. So my top 3 wide receivers I think are no-brainers, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. CeeDee Lamb finished wide receiver 1 last year. He was second by averages. Tyreek Hill finished wide receiver 2 last year. He was first by averages. And Amon-Ra finished wide receiver 3 last year, 4th on averages. They are all 3 incredible wide receivers that can explode for big points because they are the primary options, primary targets on their teams. Tyreek Hill does have Jalen Waddle in his way, but it seems like Tua's always going to Tyreek, and Tyreek is much, much better than Jalen. His explosive ability is even better. So these are my top 3. I mean, you can order them however you'd like, but this is how I thought they would finish. I think maybe Amon-Ra's like a half step down from the first 2, but they're all extremely solid players. Number 4, I have Jamar Chase. If Joe Burrow is healthy this season, Jamar Chase will finally be able to show people why he is a highly touted wide receiver. I mean, he is skill for skill, one of the best in the game. On the same level as Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra. I mean, probably better than Amon-Ra, probably better than CeeDee Lamb. So, yeah, he finished wide receiver 10 last year despite Joe Burrow's injuries, 11 on averages. So he still did well despite what his offense looked like. Number 5, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. If you have heard me talk about football at all since the draft, you have heard me talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. He is incredible. I mean, so good. I saw him play in college. He looked unbelievable. I saw 2 years of him. So it wasn't just one. I don't have one fluke year to go off of. I saw him 2 years in a row, And there is no one like him. I mean, he has the hype level of Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase coming out of LSU back-to-back years when they were coming into the draft. I think Marvin Harrison has the capabilities of being the greatest of all time. I'm not exaggerating. He's a generational talent. This is really what I believe. So I think right off the bat, year one, perfect situation. He's got a good quarterback that has no one to pass it to except for his tight end, who's not going to go deep, right? He's not getting, a fucking 4 verticals deep cut from Trey McBride. That's going to be Marvin Harrison. So sure, Trey McBride might eat into targets, but only underneath, right? Marvin's going to eat this year. He is going to eat. He's in the perfect situation. He's a top-tier wide receiver. God, just wait. You guys are going to just enjoy his football. Garrett Wilson, number 6. Another really, really good wide receiver that has never had a quarterback to support him. He was wide receiver 30 last year, wide receiver 36 on averages, which sounds horrible, but actually it's amazing that he even managed that, right, with the quarterback play that he had. You could look at someone like Drake London, who finished much worse last year with maybe better quarterback play. The quarterback play wasn't all Zach Wilson's fault. I think Desmond Ridder is probably a worse quarterback than Zach Wilson was, but the O-line was so bad that I think Garrett Wilson's overall QB play was worse, and he finished much better. If Aaron Rodgers is healthy, I expect that Garrett Wilson will finally have his top-tier wide receiver-like finish. So I kind of gave him 6 based on his skill level. I think he's that tier, right? I have all my top wide receivers, all 7 of my top wide receivers are in this top 8. The only one that took a dip from being in the top 7 out of the 7 was Justin Jefferson, and that's because he is going to have generationally bad quarterback play. A.J. Brown is next, and he, I've talked about this already. He started the season last season like a monster. He was headed for a top 3 finish. And as A.J. Brown does, he just shat the bed in the second half, just disappeared, finished wide receiver 8 on averages despite averaging wide receiver 2 numbers for the first half of the year. He finished wide receiver 5 overall, which is, still a solid finish. So that's why I have him here. Assuming that the other people don't have the injury issues that they had last year, this is a pretty good spot for A.J. Brown. If he was wide receiver 5 on totals, but he didn't have to contend with Jamar Chase. He didn't have to contend with Garrett Wilson. He has now Marvin Harrison to contend with. This is a pretty generous spot for him. And yeah, this is what I think. I do think with all health, A.J. Brown still manages to somehow get into this wide receiver 1 tier, even though I don't like him. Number 8, I have Justin Jefferson. Like I said, the guy on average was wide receiver 5 last year, which should not come as a shock. He is one of the best players in football. He is arguably the best wide receiver in football. 1A to Tyreek Hill's 1B, maybe. But he is going to be thrown to by Sam Darnold this year. And that ends him. He's so good that he can still finish 8. But gosh, Sam Darnold, I feel for the man. Number 9, I have Puka Nacua. Obviously, Puka was the shock of last year. To anyone who's not a Rams fan, I saw that coming. Obviously, I say that, but I didn't draft him. Well, to be fair, I also thought Cooper Kupp was going to be right. I thought Puka was really good. Okay, so let me say this. What I just said was complete bullshit. I did not see Puka coming. I thought Puka was going to be really, really good. I didn't think he was going to finish the way he did last year in fantasy because I didn't think Cooper Kupp was going to be what he was last year. So if I knew that Puka was going to be targeted as the wide receiver 1 because of Cooper Kupp's availability, then I would have guessed it. All right, I'll say that. Anyway, Puka Nacua, great player. He is a very Cooper Kupp-esque player. He is a phenomenal route runner. He's excellent at getting separation from his defenders. He always gets open, so he's going to be targeted a lot. The Rams love giving the ball to their best players. He's going to get the ball a lot. Why is he number 9 despite finishing wide receiver 6 last year and wide receiver 9 on averages, and this is his second year where wide receivers usually get a big boost? The reason is touchdowns. I don't think he's going to get too many of them. The Rams like to run for their touchdowns. Matt Stafford has a tendency of throwing interceptions when we get to the red zone. So, yeah, we usually get rushing touchdowns and not passing touchdowns. He'll get some. He just won't get that many. Not enough to justify being over anyone I've named so far. He's a great player. He's going to have great volume. His floor is always going to be good. So, absolutely solid wide receiver 1-tier player. Number 10, I have Drake London. This is the biggest rise out of anyone in any of my rankings. First year in his career, he has a quarterback that can support a wide receiver 1 type player. I am choosing to be optimistic that he's not a bum and that it really was just quarterback play that affected him. So we'll see. I mean, this one is really just like, I don't have a way to justify it, but obviously a lot of people do believe this as well. Wide receiver 2-tier, number 11, probably the shock of my rankings. I have Ladd McConkey. You could not ask for a better situation than what Ladd McConkey has. He has Justin Herbert, arguably one of the best quarterbacks, skill for skill in the game, passing to him as likely the wide receiver 1. Justin Herbert has lost Keenan Allen. He's lost Mike Williams. All he's got left is that absolute bum Josh Palmer. So, the Chargers drafted Ladd McConkey at the very beginning of the second round. They've spent good draft capital on him. He figures to be an important part of this offense right off the bat. If you get a healthy Justin Herbert passing to this guy, the sky is the limit. I mean, scoring, volume, he's going to have it both. And I think he's going to be a great finish this year. DJ Moore, number 12. Everybody knows DJ Moore is one of my favorite players in the league. He finished wide receiver 7 last year. He had a wide receiver 10 on average finish. So he is one of the best wide receivers in the game. Skill for skill, he is one of the best wide receivers in the game. I mean, he is just so uber talented. You just have to give him the ball and he'll do the rest. Now the problem is, and this hurts my heart because I root for DJ Moore no matter where he is, that he's going to have Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze to contend for targets with. I think he will be the wide receiver 1 on Chicago because he's the best wide receiver on the team. But the way that Keenan Allen plays, I feel fits Caleb Williams so much more. And that is what I'm afraid of for DJ Moore. But I believe in him. He's the best wide receiver on that team and should be targeted as such. So he's my 12. Mike Evans is my 13. You guys know I don't like Mike Evans. He was wide receiver 4, finished last year. He was wide receiver 6 on averages. So top tier, one of the best picks you can get according to the stats. I just don't like Mike Evans. I just don't like him. I mean, he's good. He's a good player. But I just don't like him for fantasy. I don't know what it is. I cannot explain it, so I'm just going to move on. Number 14, Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed was the wide receiver 26 on totals last year, wide receiver 24 on averages. Why do I think he's going to suddenly jump up to 14? Because I think Jordan Love is a better player than he was last year, and I think Jaden Reed is going to have that wide receiver 2 boost and take over as the clear wide receiver 1 on a team that just throws to anybody, right? The Packers' game plan, offensive scheme last year was one of the most mind-boggling things I've ever seen. They just used, 8 receivers a game last year? It was so odd. And I'm praying and hoping that if they're really gunning for that championship this year, which they weren't really last year, I don't think they expected to get as far as they did. If they are really trying to make a title run this year, then they have to fix that. They have to let their best players play. Right? It should be Jaden Reed, number 1, Dontavian Wicks, number 2, Christian Watson, number 3, right? That's how their offense should be structured. So Jaden Reed, in a world that makes sense, will finish high this year. And that's why he's 14 for me. Deebo Samuel, number 15. Another one that I can't really explain, very similarly to Mike Evans, he is the wide receiver 9 of last year, wide receiver 6 if you count averages. So he's incredible. He's incredible for fantasy. I just don't get it. When I played last year, at no point was I like, oh, Deebo Samuel is a guy I want. Oh, I should get Deebo Samuel. Oh, that's a wide receiver 1 type player. Never. At no point last year. So this was really surprising to me that he finished so well. At least Mike Evans I knew, but Deebo Samuel just went under the radar, I guess. Yeah, I can't explain it, so I'm going to move on. Number 16, Keenan Allen. He was the wide receiver 3 on averages last year. Obviously, he always has injury issues. Wide receiver 8 in total. So either way, he was a wide receiver 1 tier finish. Again, same problem as DJ Moore. He's got 2 other incredible wide receivers on his team. Who knows what the target share is going to look like. Yeah. His baseline is really good, though. Devontae Adams, number 17. He finished 13 last year, 20 on averages. He has no quarterback play. He has a bad-ish O-line. He can't really. He also has Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers now. He had Jacoby last year, but now with the addition of Brock Bowers and 1 extra target for his quarterback who can't even pass the ball. Who is it? Gardner Minshew, I think. Yeah, trash. Like not trash to like Daniel Jones level trash where you can't trust him at all, but like bad, right? He's a bad quarterback. Where was I? Yeah, so. Devontae has more people to contend with. His quarterback play still isn't good. He's going to take a dip. This honestly was probably generous. I couldn't do it. I couldn't put Devontae Adams lower than this because in reality, he's a top 10 wide receiver. I couldn't put him lower than this. I'm sorry. It probably is not the right spot for him. He probably should be lower, but I couldn't. 18, Chris Olave. This is a guy that I do not believe in. I am pure pressured into putting him at 18. And by pure pressure, I mean the pressure of facts. I don't like him. I don't like him as a person. I don't like him as a player. He was the wide receiver 21 finish last year, 22 on averages, but figures to be the clear wide receiver. I mean, not figures to be. He is the wide receiver 1 of the Saints. He figures to be the only thing that Derek Carr throws towards. So I couldn't really do less than 18, unfortunately, even though in my head, I think he's going to finish way less than this. But facts don't care about my feelings. 19, Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers was the wide receiver 27 last year, 34 on averages. I expected him to take a huge boost this year as a second-year wide receiver who has pretty good skills. And, that was showcased last night in the Ravens game. Obviously, I was not going to touch my rankings anymore after the first game got played. There were still some adjustments I wanted to make in that flex tier. But Zay Flowers was my 19 prior to that game, and he will not finish. He will not finish in the wide receiver 2 tier. I'm so sorry to say. Lamar Jackson cannot support a wide receiver 1 caliber player. So as long as that is your quarterback, do not expect to see any wide receiver 1s. I'd be shocked if he can support a wide receiver 2 the way I saw him play last night. I think he can only support someone that's large enough and athletic enough to jump for his widely overthrown balls like Isaiah Likely. So, yeah, 19 for Zay Flowers, but realistically, he's not even in flex here for me anymore. Michael Pittman Jr. is number 20. He finished wide receiver 16 last year, wide receiver 17 on averages, despite having to play with, I think, 3 different quarterbacks throughout the season. Anthony Richardson was an okay passer when he was in the games last year, and he did go to Pittman a lot. He did. So I like that duo. But I don't know. I don't love that duo because I just don't know if Anthony Richardson is really anything other than a running back. He is very much that same Lamar Jackson type. So I don't know. Pity City is unfortunately a very, very good player that just needs a good situation, and I don't know if this is it. Flex tier, Brian Thomas Jr., first round rookie wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, so I don't have any stats for him. He figures to be the top target for Trevor Lawrence's new offense. This one's a hard one. I have him here, but realistically, there's like a standard dev of plus or minus 20 on this guy. Like he could finish wide receiver 50. He could finish wide receiver 1. He's really good. I mean, one of the fastest wide receivers from the draft. He ran a 4.33 40-yard dash, I think, which puts him in that same like tier as like Tyreek Hill. So giving Trevor Lawrence what's probably his best wide receiver to date, we'll see what happens. I mean, this is make or break year for Trevor Lawrence, and we'll see based on that where Brian Thomas finishes. I figure that Trevor Lawrence is probably just mid, and that Brian Thomas Jr., despite probably being a hot prospect or like a pretty good fucking player that could finish in that wide receiver 1 tier, is going to finish in this flex tier from mid quarterback play. Number 22, Tank Dell, finished the wide receiver 36 last year, wide receiver 16 on averages. Now, this one might be a little bit unpopular because out of all the Texans, I first put Tank Dell. Let me tell you guys something, right? This has driven me insane throughout pre-draft and going into the season. People did not watch the Texans last year. They really didn't. I had Tank Dell, and I had Nico Collins, and I had CJ Stroud on my fantasy team. I had the entire Texans offense. Let me tell you something. When Tank Dell and Nico Collins played together, right, when they were both there together, Tank Dell was wide receiver 1. I don't mean in points. I'm not sure. Well, he was actually in points too. He did have more points. Up until he got injured, Tank Dell had more points than Nico Collins. Fantasy points. But when they played together, and even honestly at the draft, CJ Stroud made it very clear he prefers Tank Dell as his primary target. Tank Dell is CJ Stroud's primary read. These analysts that are saying Nico Collins is the clear wide receiver 1 on this team have no idea what they're talking about. CJ Stroud prefers Tank Dell, okay? Of the 3 of them, all in health, if one of them is going to finish on top of the other 2, it's going to be Tank Dell. Number 23, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver 12. Average points 13.8, finishing wide receiver 12. So either way you look at it, wide receiver 12. This is a bad one. I don't like that I ranked him here. He probably will finish higher than this, but I just couldn't put him in front of any of the other people at that time. I also don't expect that the 49ers offense is going to have the mirth or the depth of touchdowns that they had last year. Last year they were scoring from every position in every way. Quite incredible what they were doing. So, you know, it would be crazy if they had another year like that. We'll see. Number 24, Nico Collins, wide receiver 17 from last year, wide receiver 13 average finish. Probably if Tank Dell gets injured, Nico Collins will have a wide receiver 1 type year, I think. I am doubting Stephon Diggs having any sort of prominent role in this offense, clearly, as you can tell. And maybe that's just because I hate Stephon Diggs, because he was one of the primary factors that lost me my half PPR league last year. I hate Stephon Diggs. I don't think he's actually that good of a player. I think he's one of the most overrated players ever, at least from the football that I know, because I haven't been watching all that long. I think he's overrated as shit. Nico Collins is so much better than him. And Nico is on the same level as Tank Dell. Tank Dell just gets like a slight edge on targets because CJ Stroud is so in love with him. But Nico very well could be the best player on that team. Not the most explosive, but he could be the best wide receiver. I think if anyone gets injured, he'd be one of the best picks, or like one of the best people to have on your team, as you know, throughout the year. But yeah, Nico Collins, I think, is still, despite everything, going to finish in that same flex tier on a team that has 3 targets. You know, I couldn't put him any lower than this because he's that good. Number 25, Rashee Rice. I originally had him at 18 where Chris Olave was, and I don't know what happened, but I erased him at some point and forgot to put him back in here. So this was just kind of like a rush placement. After yesterday, he's probably going to finish higher than this from what I saw. Number 26, DK Metcalf, wide receiver 15 last year, wide receiver 17 on averages. I hate DK Metcalf as a person. I hate DK Metcalf as a player. And I'm just praying and hoping the Seahawks this year realize that Jackson Smith-Njigba is a much better player than him and that he can be the wide receiver 1 instead. Otherwise, I just don't think DK Metcalf is that good. He doesn't have good separation. So, I don't expect him to be finishing really high. He's consistently every year in fantasy a low-end wide receiver to flex tier caliber player. So this is about where he's been, right? Number 27, Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 31 last year, wide receiver 33 on averages. I like him because I like Bo Nix. Cortland Sutton is a good player, but Bo Nix is what puts him in this tier for me because I think Bo Nix is such a huge upgrade over Russell Wilson. Yeah. Number 28, Amari Cooper, another one that I really don't feel very good about. Amari Cooper should be higher. I just like everybody else more because Amari Cooper's quarterback is Deshaun Watson. I mean, he was the wide receiver 14 finish last year. He was wide receiver 17 on averages. The question is, how much of that was Joe Flacco, right? How much of that was Joe Flacco? I don't know because I don't have those stats anymore. But, yeah, I mean, Amari Cooper somehow still did well despite having one of the worst quarterbacks in the league as his primary play caller. So he will probably finish higher than this. I just couldn't put him higher than this. There's a lot of honorable mentions that I have here. A lot of people that I personally, because I'm assuming health, could not put in here that I do actually think are going to finish in the top 20. Based on last night, Xavier Worthy's a good mention, right? There are a lot of other first and second round wide receivers. I don't know what I'm saying. First year wide receivers, rookie players, and second year wide receivers that are playing behind other people that can really take a rise up. There are other people who are the wide receiver ones on their team, but I don't believe in their team that aren't here. Yeah, I mean, in health, this is what I expect, but realistically, the final rankings will probably not finish anything like this. All right, tight ends. And obviously this is another one that got really affected by the game yesterday. But as far as I had it, we have three tiers of tight ends. One is the wide receiver 1/2 scoring tier, right? So these are the tight ends that will score for you like a wide receiver. Obviously, it's a pretty easy list, right? We know there are 5 absolute killers at tight end. Number 1 is Sam Laporta, who was the number 1 tight end finish from last year. Number 2, I have, and I forgot to put his stats, I guess, Trey McBride, who figures to be and is projected to be the tight end 2 finish for this year. He is, a pass-catching tight end that really got his chance to show how good he was last year when Zach Ertz got injured. And he was incredible. I mean, so good. He is so good. Kyler Murray obviously loves targeting him. He was the number 1 target for Kyler Murray at the end of the year last year. He is probably going to be the number 2 target from this point on. But, I mean, as far as underneath routes and like 0-yard passes, not 0-yard passes, possession passes, he's probably going to be the top choice for Kyler Murray. I don't think Kyler Murray is going to be looking for Marvin Harrison for possession plays, right? He's not going to look for his explosive wide receiver for a play where he just needs like 5 yards. So Trey McBride set for a dominant year. I mean, I'm sure if you pull up the stats of just like the last 7 weeks or whenever Zach Ertz got injured onwards, if you pull up those stats, it would show that Trey McBride was probably, I don't know, the second best tight end throughout that period. Probably. I don't have those stats, unfortunately. Number 3, I have Dalton Kincaid, who finished tight end 15 last year, tight end 16 on averages. The Bills have made it a point to mention that he is the tight end 1 this year. He will be no longer in a committee with Dawson Knox. His last year, according to the Bills, was meant so that Dawson Knox could mentor Dalton Kincaid. They started playing him more towards the end of the year, and he showed what he's capable of. The hype that this guy had coming out of college was that he was going to be the best pass-catching tight end that we've ever seen coming out of college. They called him the next Travis Kelce, and now he's in a situation that is very, very reminiscent of Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes in that he has one of, if not the second best quarterback in the league as his primary play caller, and that quarterback has no one else to pass to, right? They got Keon Coleman. I'm sure I've already mentioned this somewhere in the quarterback rankings, but Keon Coleman is not someone I believe in. I don't think he's that good. I think he's the next Quentin Johnson. So Dalton Kincaid for me is, I mean, he has the ability and the potential to be the tight end 1 this year, but I think 3 is a good spot for him because Sam Laporta and Trey McBride are much more sure things. Like, you know what they can do. They've shown it. You know what their offense is going to look like. They've shown it. So because of that, I put Dalton Kincaid at number 3. Travis Kelce I have as number 4. He was the tight end 2 last year, both in averages and total points. He still looks like he's got it. I mean, the stuff that I saw yesterday, the way he was able to get separation, get open, he still looks like the same guy. He really does not age. I think he does a lot of stem cells. That's my guess. That's my theory. Patrick Mahomes did not target him as much, and he probably won't target him as much this year because he's got actual options this year. So that's why I think his stats might take a hit. That's still, even his stats taking a hit, though, is only good for tight end 4 at the worst. Mark Andrews, tight end 5. Realistically, I am scratching Mark Andrews out of here completely. He won't even make it to the second tier. He's a streaming tight end for this year, in my opinion. He was used mostly as an offensive lineman in yesterday's game because of the Ravens' O-line woes. And the one play that he got targeted for a possession play, it was a possession play to get like 4 yards for a first down, right? He tripped over his own leg right before the first down. Oh my God, he was awful. Yeah, no. So originally I thought he was going to be here. I would probably just replace this as Ravens tight end because I think Isaiah Likely will probably finish here. Flex level scoring tier. So these are the tight ends that can get you flex-like numbers week in and week out, meaning that they are very playable and maybe even flexible given the right matchup. So I have Evan Ingram, who was the tight end 6 finish last year, tight end 7 on averages. He's really good. He's on a team that has not many viable targets. I mean, I talked about Brian Thomas Jr., who could be the wide receiver 1 for Trevor Lawrence and could be their biggest offensive weapon this year. But Evan Ingram is the known thing, right? And that's it. They really only have Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the way they look, and this is one thing I should mention, actually, because I want to make it clear how shitty of a pick Christian Kirk is, because I know there was some question about me in the ranking, the team stuff, why I said Christian Kirk is like unplayable for, there was somebody's flex and I gave them a bad score for that. Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas are the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 of the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are on both ends. Those are your 2 outside wide receivers. Christian Kirk is being played in a slot position and is not going to be in the game that much. He is in the slot and will only come out in 3 wide receiver sets, which the Jacksonville Jaguars don't always run. In fact, they don't run a lot of, which is why tight end is such a valuable position for the Jaguars, and why Evan Ingram is probably going to have a good year again, because they run 2 wideouts and 1 tight end as their third receiver, really. So expect Evan Ingram to have a pretty good year. He's going to be playable at tight end every week. He should not be dropped and streamed for somebody else. Kyle Pitts, I'm going to be high on this year because of how the Falcons look this year. He didn't obviously finish in a playable fashion last year, nor has he any other year, and people have only been high on him up to this point because physically he is one of the most imposing and athletic human beings that maybe God has ever created. But yeah, hard to know what to make of him for this year. But if he is who we think he is, this year he should prove it and could very well finish, or could very well put up numbers that are reminiscent of your like wide receiver 2 caliber people. Number 8, George Kittle, always a good option. Super inconsistent player, right? The thing about George Kittle is that he will have monster weeks and he'll have negligible weeks, right? So you're always gonna, if you have him and that's your best tight end, you're gonna want to put him in your tight end position every week, because any week he can have a league winner or a week winner for you. And any week, if he gets 0, like how much points did you really miss out on putting a marginally worse but more consistent tight end there, right? Like you lost 8 points from 0, like you went from 8 to 0 versus you went from 8 to 25, right? So George Kittle is in that range for me. He is flexible every week, or he is playable every week, and not a streaming candidate. And then number 9, I have TJ Hawkinson. Like I said, this list is done based on totals. I think TJ Hawkinson is in that first tier of tight ends, but he's going to miss the first 4 weeks at least. So that's a lot of points he's not going to get. And honestly, I believe that even despite not getting a lot of those points, he's going to finish pretty high still. So tight end 3 from last year on averages. I'm not sure. I have tight end 3 as total finish too. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that would be crazy. Yeah, that's everyone. I think honorable mention here to Brock Bowers. Obviously, I don't believe in the Raiders offense, so I don't have him in here, but I think, if the Raiders surprise us and actually have a consistent offense, are able to get their plays out, yada yada, Brock Bowers could easily be in here. Easily. He's like the Marvin Harrison of tight ends. That's what people were saying about him. I never really watched him play, but that's what people were saying about him coming out of Georgia. They were saying that he was a generational tight end. And, they had that kind of hype for Dalton Kincaid the year before, and I heard that hype from Dalton Kincaid, and it was so much more for Brock Bowers. So that's how good people think he is. We'll see. The rest of the tight ends are obviously streaming candidates. You play based on matchup. If you don't have any of these 9 people, and including if you have TJ Hawkins, Mark Andrews is no longer the guy. So, but anyway, if you have any of these 9, except for TJ for the first 4 weeks, you're just going to have to go based off matchup who you want to play. And that'll pretty much do it. Yeah. I think for the rest of this podcast series, I'm probably just going to look every week at how people finished and talk about what to kind of expect from them later in the year, who's surprising, what people am I going to be looking at for the coming week, stuff like that. We'll see. I'm kind of just doing this as I go. Yeah, that does it for episode 1.